Hello, everyone. Picking up from last week, time is your ultimate luxury. Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is ChooseFI.
You're listening to ChooseFI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. ChooseFI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, very excited to dive into this week's episode. And I tell you what, Brad and I just had so many notes, so much we wanted to cover that we hit stop for last week's episode and then immediately started recording again just because there's just so much stuff going on and so much that we just want to share with you guys. And that's what the show is. It is a wonderful roundtable for us to be able to have these discussions. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I'm doing quite well. Yeah, feels like we're in a flow, and it's just fun to talk about this kind of stuff. And yeah, one thing just blends into another. There are all these ways to approach life. And I think that's what's so fun about financial independence is it's not just about the money and how do we become wealthy. If that was just the goal, I feel like it would be boring. It would be just about being rich. And that's not what we're doing here. We're trying to build rich lives, right? We're trying to look at the things that matter. And when we have time, which, as you always say, is our most precious non-renewable resource. And it's such an important way to look at it. When we have time, we can focus on other things. We're not constantly in that state of fight or flight of, can I pay the bills? When do I have to get to work? Do I have time to pick up food on the way home and then drive my kid to swimming or basketball or soccer or whatever it is? And you're constantly running, right? When you have your finances set and you have them on autopilot and over a long enough timeline, you're going to get wealthy and you're going to reach financial independence, then you have that space to take a step back and say, how do I want to spend my time? Who do I want to spend my time with? What do I want to spend my time doing? And I think those are the things that matter because, like it or not, we get a very finite amount of time on this planet and we're kidding ourselves if we're thinking otherwise. And there's no dress rehearsal. This is the one life we get to live. And to waste years and decades of it doing something you hate or being in that constant state of fight or flight, it just doesn't make sense when there's another path.
That's inspiring, man. And it is something that I think people need to really be able to visualize. It's not trite and it's not a platitude when we say time is your ultimate luxury. If you are making $200,000 a year, $600,000 a year, $1 million a year, and you're working 80, 90 hours a week. Do you feel rich? Do you actually feel rich? Do you feel wealthy at that point? Maybe you're making, $5 million a year, but you live inside your cubicle, your office, whatever else, and there's nothing outside of it. Do you feel like you're winning? You're winning the rat race? Time is your ultimate luxury. And there's a balance of everything. There's a level of income. There's a quote from someone somewhere, I've been rich and I've been poor. I'd rather be rich. What it misses is that time is your ultimate luxury, right? And so certainly we have and will continue to focus on income earning strategies. But if income in the absence of this framework is the goal, you're going to feel like you've achieved it and it's a trap. So we're going to explore that. We got a lot of great stories and thoughts to bring into this conversation. But Brad, we actually had a couple updates and I want to give you some room to explore that, starting with, first and foremost, the tax abatement feedback has been just absolutely incredible from people. And I thought I would give you room because it feels like it's that time of year to be considering this sort of thing.
Yeah, this is a cool one. There's a lot of these little themes that have run through ChooseFI that I just get a disproportionate amount of positive feedback about. And certainly everything is negotiable is one that we've talked about in terms of, hey, it never hurts to ask. Sometimes there are win-wins. There are all these things like you can set up. We've talked about negotiating salary. That's another huge through line that we've seen that has been just something that people win with. And for whatever reason, this one random little thing I mentioned a couple months back, probably 6 months ago at this point, about our tax returns and tax notices that we might get has really resonated with people. So this is just like one of those little insider pieces of information that I've picked up as a CPA over the years. And now, obviously, just like always, this is a podcast, so it's not financial advice. I can't promise anything, but I'm just talking from my experience. So basically, every time that I've seen, in my case, a client get a tax notice, let's say from the IRS, and what generally happens if they owe additional tax is there are three components that are shown on that notice. So there's the additional tax, which is just the actual liability that you owe. Okay. And that usually, unless the IRS made a mistake, that's pretty locked in stone. And then you have, if that money is late and you've owed it, there are two components that are kind of negative in that one is interest that you owe on that additional payment, and one is a penalty. And now the penalties can usually be fairly significant. So what I have seen, and what is kind of like an insider information in the CPA profession, is you can write a letter to the IRS in response to that notice. Now, let's assume for this hypothetical that you say, okay, I clearly understand I owe additional tax and they didn't make a mistake. You owe that tax. So using that as kind of the background here, you would write a letter saying, in essence, I understand, Mr. IRS, Mrs. IRS, I received the notice, blah, 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 dated, whatever, that I owe additional tax. Please find that payment attached along with the interest payment, the interest that I owe, because there's no way to get out of the interest. Okay. So you're actually responding in a positive and saying, I understand I owe these two components. And then you follow that with what's known as a request for abatement. Okay. So you're asking them basically to get rid of the penalty. The fancy word for whatever reason is abatement. So you just act like a nice, normal human being and just say, hey, look, I messed up. You don't say, hey, look, but you say, I understand this was a one-time error. I didn't understand, or I filed this return late because, and you just explain what happened. And you say, if you look at my prior history, I've always filed my returns on time and paid the full amount. There was no intention to underpay my tax. And I have taken great care to understand this and make sure it never happens again in the future. I respectfully request an abatement of the penalty of, you write the amount that was on that notice and you just say, thank you. And like I said, you enclose the amount. So you enclose the amount of additional tax you owe plus that interest, which there's no way out of the interest that I've ever seen. So you send those two things in, you send that abatement request letter. And in my experience, again, I can't guarantee this, but in my experience, I've seen this work almost 100% of the time. I can't exactly think of an example where they didn't abate the penalty. So that very first time, now, obviously, if this was something you did year after year, you made the same mistake just out of negligence or whatever, stupidity or whatever it is, right? They're not going to abate the penalty. And you deserve to pay the penalty because you've made a mistake over and over again, probably willingly. So that's a separate scenario. But if you just make an honest mistake, the IRS is really pretty nice in my experience. So just do what I said there. And I think there's a high probability of success. And the other thing, and Jonathan, this is funny because it ties into what we talked about last week in terms of a free roll, right? So the cool thing here is that let's say you didn't send in a payment. So in this case, you didn't follow my advice. So you just send in this abatement request letter. And let's say they deny it. Well, additional penalty could keep accruing because you didn't pay your tax. But once you've paid your tax liability, I can't think of an example where additional penalty would ever accrue. So that penalty is locked. So if you followed my advice and you sent in the payment, the tax liability is paid in full at that point. This penalty will not keep accruing. So there's no downside to you. It truly is that free roll because there's no downside to sending that abatement request letter. The worst that happens is they say no. They send you a letter back a couple weeks or a month later and say, hey, I'm sorry, we're not going to abate that penalty, and you just pay it. So you're in no worse shape. But if they do abate it, then you have paid $0 in penalty. The whole thing was gone. And it's only to the positive. So like we talked about last week, that is positive expected value on sending that letter in. There's literally no downside to it.
And Brad, I think it's worth pointing out that one of the reasons we keep bringing this up is that you share these types of advice and tips and feedbacks along with, the script, the written versions of this occasionally in the newsletter, the weekly newsletter that's gone out. And there have been many, many, many people that have personally used this with success. And a percentage of those people that have used it have sent you back their feedback on taking this strategy and it working to their great shock and amazement.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And yeah, that's the kind of trend that I look for in the responses to my FI weekly newsletter. That's what's so cool about really, I mean, as we talk about all the time, I literally sit down every Monday to write this newsletter myself. And then it goes out Tuesday and I get all the responses. So I go through our email system and go through every single response. And it's cool to see these trends and see what really resonates with people. So rest assured, if you're getting that newsletter, which you could get on the email list at ChooseFI.com/subscribe, and you're writing back, you hit reply to that, I am getting that response and I'm looking at it. And Jonathan, it helps inform what we talk about on the podcast and what we can really spread to so many more people. And it's really wild and amazing to see these successes because people take action. They don't just passively listen to this podcast, which there's some weird alchemy of what we do here that people really do take action. And it's very inspiring to see it.
Well, I have one addendum as well that I wanted to add on to something we talked about last week. We were talking about some of the unexpected benefits of being able to make purchases with credit cards. And I realized there's something I've been sitting on that I haven't mentioned, but I've used it now twice with success, and it saved my family some frustration and some money. And that is the fraud protection you get when you purchase with a credit card. And I don't think people realize this, but when you purchase something using credit instead of debit, when you purchase it with credit, you are covered on most cards with their fraud protection. So if the product that you purchase does not arrive, does not come, is not what it was marketed to be, you have the right to go contest it with your company, and they will, in most cases, refund you the money ahead of them even be able to claw it back from the manufacturer. And so I don't abuse this by any means, but there have been two instances within the last year. One where my wife purchased a present based on a Facebook ad for, one of our kids, and it just was a no-show 4 months later. And a similar purchase was made by us, and it literally 6 months later, a several $100 purchase, it never showed up. And in both cases, we were able to call, in this case, the card that we have is through Chase. We called Chase and they 100% refunded the money ahead of time before even getting it back from the vendor. So to think about the implications of that, is this a fraud? Do your due diligence or not, et cetera. That extra layer of backstop or protection of knowing, hey, if something does go wrong, this is actually built into basically an insurance plan that my credit card company has in place. That's a pretty cool additional benefit that people don't factor in when making their purchasing decisions.
That's fascinating. I honestly, I personally have not even factored that in. And I'm very pro credit card, right? So it's interesting to say that out loud on a personal finance podcast, to say it so strongly, but we are absolutely pro credit card here. Now, pro responsible use of credit card, right? That's what we always talk about. If you're responsible with your credit card and pay it off on time and in full every single month, you're not incurring any interest expense. And certainly if you're not spending more money than you would have otherwise by using the credit card, that's what I consider responsible. Then, to me, Jonathan, using a credit card is an absolute slam dunk, right? Think about all of the benefits. Obviously, we've talked so many times about travel rewards that in and of itself is reason enough to use it. And we've gone on and on about that on many episodes. We have a section on our website at ChooseFI.com/travel. And again, that in and of itself is enough, but you get a sometimes 30 to 45 day, in essence, interest-free loan on every purchase you're making, right? Because you don't have to pay that bill until the statement closes plus X number of days. You just talked about that type of fraud protection, but there's also additional fraud protection on the other side. If someone steals your credit card or somehow hacks the number, this happens, unfortunately, it happens a lot. There's no liability to you. I think the absolute maximum by law is $50 is my strong understanding. But I've had this happen to me a bunch of times where there's a fraudulent purchase and I have never paid even $1 out of pocket to cover that fraud. So as far as I'm concerned, in my past history, that is actually a $0 exposure. But I guess by law, it's $50. So, I mean, that is amazing as compared to a debit card, which I still can't imagine that people use debit cards to pay for things when really you're exposing your entire balance in your checking account in that case needlessly. I really don't understand it. Again, if you're responsible with your credit cards, right? Because Jonathan, if you get some fraud on that and someone steals thousands of dollars from your checking account, it is really, really hard and not impossible, obviously, but it's really hard and time consuming to get that money back.
Yeah, I agree with your point. I think there's a little bit of nuance here. Like your bank, imagine using your main central bank debit card. There are a few exchanges. I'll give you an example here. Like if you were going to make the case to a debit card, they would really need to incentivize you to use it. Like for example, Coinbase, which is a crypto exchange, will allow you to use their Coinbase debit card with the pre-funded amount. And then you will get up to a 4% return on any purchases made with that debit card. So if you were trying to, accrue some crypto, I think in this case, you can specify what do you want. I think it was like 2% you'll get if you go to Ethereum or 4% if you go to something like XLM. There's a few different ones that you can choose from. But depending on what you choose, you can get that sort of return. And in this case, you're taking money out of your bank account, you're putting it on this debit card, and then you're just spending that. And then you got to make the decision on whether or not, that's worth it or not. I've used it a couple of times and I don't know. I don't know if I would stick with that or not, but that at least makes sense to me. But using your bank debit card for all the reasons you just mentioned makes zero sense to me. I mean, people will say, I wonder if my identity has been stolen. Absolutely, your identity has been stolen. The question is, has anything happened, to that? Has it been used? Are there enough protections on the back end to protect that? I just got an alert from my card that my phone number is now available on the dark web. I don't even know what that means. I don't even know where the dark web is. It sounds like someplace I probably don't want to go. But yes, your identity has been stolen. Of course it has at this point. But so what you need to do is you need to put enough protections around your financial assets that you're not liable for funds that are used in a way that you did not authorize, and making sure that your purchases are coming from a credit card or an extra layer of protection right now in a cyber criminal world of chaos. And that sounds like an episode title right there.
Yeah, that's it. No, and I'm glad you slowed down there a couple of minutes ago and talked about the nuance. Obviously, there's nuance to every aspect of life. And I can give an example of when I have used a debit card, but it is a very specific, like essentially a one-time use. I don't use my debit card for normal use.
You have a debit card.
I do have a debit card. And actually, I went out of my way to open up a Schwab debit card. So like Charles Schwab, the investing platform. I think it's called like the high yield investor checking or something like that. Don't quote me on that.
That probably gives you like 0.3%, something like
Well, no. So I think it gives essentially nothing, but that's not why I did it. So that card.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just love to hear what people are calling high yield these days. That's that's going to be a meme all by itself.
0.02. No, this card is the best that I've ever found in terms of if you're traveling abroad to get no foreign transaction fees and no ATM fees. So if you were, when we went to Greece for the Chautauqua a bunch of years ago, almost 4 years ago at this point, which is crazy in and of itself, I went up getting one of these Schwab debit cards. I think I put like $600 in my account. So my exposure was that as opposed to my entire checking balance. And what was cool was I was able to put that debit card into an ATM machine in where we were, is Thessaloniki, Greece. And I took out whatever, I forget, 100 euros or something like that. And there theoretically was an ATM charge on that ATM. But what's cool is Schwab actually rebates it to you on the backside and gives you the best possible foreign transaction, the translation between euros and dollars. So that is the best example I've ever seen of. And I think that's useful for everybody listening to this is if you're going abroad, you're going to get crushed on translating the currency from US dollars to wherever you're going. In most cases, if you go into the airport and try to exchange it there, or even in a bank, you try to do it ahead of time. This is the best way I've seen. And it's just so convenient that you can just throw your debit card in and grab whatever little bit of currency you need to get you through the rest of the trip. So yeah, Jonathan, thank you. As always, there's nuance to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem, Brad. And while we're talking about crypto exchanges, the crypto bloodbath that is happening right now, maybe you could say we're in a bleed sideways at this point, or when this episode goes out, it might be another leg down. But what is happening that people do not appreciate, and I know I've had a couple conversations with people that have some amount of crypto, but don't seem to be aware of this, is that there are exchanges that on the back end have announced privately that they're insolvent or that their finances are on edge or have had to pay significant fees. And they are not stable, the back end. I'm sure the big ones are probably okay, but it doesn't really matter. The lack of liquidity in the market at the moment has implications for people who have assets stored in staking funds and on exchanges. And that just makes us really want to post these announcements on a regular basis because there's real money at stake, even for people that are just trying to hold.
Yeah, you're right. And obviously, this is not a cryptocurrency show, but you and I have both been learning as much as we can. I know many people in the audience have been learning, and it's something that is of interest. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say with places like Coinbase and Gemini, which are just standard exchanges, what's going on behind the scenes. I've heard nothing or have no reason to believe that they have any type of financial issues. But some of these other kind of like pseudo exchanges / banks that had like the veneer of authenticity and like old school banking behind it have really shown to be like a emperor has no clothes type scenario, where I know we've seen a company called Celsius basically implode and become insolvent, and they have completely stopped withdrawals of people's money. So if you have money sitting in Celsius, you cannot remove it. And it's impossible to say whether you ever will be able to. So they appear to be insolvent. I suspect there'll be a long drawn out legal issues and you might get some of your money back. But anything like that where it seems as if, and Jonathan, I've mentioned this in my own life, I've looked into these things, like BlockFi is another one. There's a third one called Voyager. And as of this moment that we're recording it on June 29th, these companies are not insolvent. But if I had money in them, I'd be pulling them out, because there's just like this uncertainty in that, what are they doing? They're offering you 8 or 9% returns just on simple returns. Like, oh, there's no risk is what it seems like. And that's why I call it,
while
like,
at the same point experiencing 40, 50% drawdowns.
Yeah. Massive losses behind the scenes. And like I said, that veneer of authenticity, it like, I think that's part of the biggest issue is like a lot of people who are into crypto understand that it's like this degenerate gambling to some degree. And like nobody has any idea what's going to happen. But when you put your money, your US dollars into something, a stable coin, as they call it, and you get 8 or 9% back, and it seems like a safe company, they go out of their way, like, and then you find out, as you're saying, that they've been doing shenanigans behind the scenes and exposing a lot of that money. Well, this goes back to what we talk about. When a higher return almost always is accompanied by higher risk. And when you don't understand where that return's coming from, that's even more of an alarm bell situation. And like I said, I have fallen for this too. I have put a little bit of money into some of these companies before, and I'm at the point where I'm withdrawing it just for safety's sake. And I have no reason to believe that they're going to become insolvent. But just from a risk management perspective, like when I don't understand something, I probably obviously should have never gotten into it in the first place. But I also am smart enough to say, all right, it's happened with one of these. There's no reason to believe it couldn't happen with more of them. So I'm just in a point where, again, for my risk management, I'm getting my money out of these places.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, rule number 1 to building wealth is don't lose it all. Try not to have to start over.
Hey, this is Andrew from the ChooseFI team. Hope you're enjoying the show. We're going to get right back to it after these quick messages.
Okay, let's move on to time is the ultimate luxury. And I think there's this interplay here. And there was this post in the group that really highlighted kind of the intersection of this. And I thought it was worth bringing it up for, just a community to think about the implications of winning and also the trade-offs and what are your goals. And so the member said, my husband and I make a combined income of $670,000 gross per year. Now, they're not bragging with this post, but they're saying, but we're a doctor, huge student loans, paying this down. And we bought this house. It was a foreclosure, needs a bunch of work. Now at the time we're starting off in our careers and it seemed like a great idea to save some money. My husband has a background in construction, currently an engineer. The problem is that he wants to do 90% of the construction himself, which seems amazing, but it's also a curse. We have 3 small kids, very busy, school, sports, practice, games. It doesn't leave much time for the projects. Even though we've been, living in the house for 6 years now, the roof, the windows, the kitchen, the floor still needs to be done. The kitchen is from the 1980s. So old tile, countertop, old cabinets. And my husband in this case doesn't want to hire the professionals to do this because, labor's expensive. He can do it himself. He doesn't want someone working on his house because he'll have to correct stuff after them. So good intentions, but no time to execute. So the interplay between this person and their husband is just this matter of the fact they have this great income, but there's a lot of debt that comes with that. They have a lot of things they really want to do, passion projects they want to do, no time. Do they hire it out because he has no time, or do they just slowly trying to grind it out themselves? Now, there are some communication issues, which are the underpinning of this. But Brad, I think if we don't try to solve that and we just focus on this interplay between great income, but possibly, and it sounds like a huge debt burden, I'm guessing probably, 300 to 500,000 minimum of debt, just based on this conversation. And then on top of that, no time and lots of stuff that they want to do that actually lights them up. This really gives us an opportunity to explore this relationship between time and money.
Yeah. And it's a really, really important one. Like we've said over and over again, time is that one non-renewable resource. And it's easy to write somebody off like this. Oh, they make $670,000 a year. It should be easy. I think what's so important for us to understand is there is a common humanity. Everybody has issues. It doesn't matter. This could have been the same exact issue if they were making $150,000 a year and her husband was spending all of his time trying to fix the house or whatever, do some other thing that theoretically is a good thing, right? He obviously has positive intentions. He thinks that he can do this. He can do it cheaper. I suspect he likes it. He likes having control over the project and creating something great for him and his family. I'm putting myself in his shoes. But there's a downside, and there's a very obvious downside in terms of time. And it sounds like between all of the kids' activities, and I know, believe me, I can commiserate with this in terms of driving your kids, even my kids who I don't think are that overscheduled, it feels like we're constantly driving them places. And I know, Jonathan, I was joking to you before we hit record, I'm going to a 8-hour swim meet later today because I am on the board, I'm the meet director. So I have to go set up the pool deck and then be there for the whole thing. So, I mean, time is very, very valuable, and it is easy to lose it and to lose sight of how valuable it is, because sometimes you say yes to things and you don't realize the ramifications. And I think that is probably the biggest point that I'd like to get across, is that saying yes, there's an opportunity cost, because when you're saying yes to something, especially with your time, you're giving up every other thing in the world that you could be doing with that time otherwise. And in the case of this family, it sounds like there are significant things they could be doing to potentially lower stress, to be together more. And instead, it's being spent in this one particular way.
Yeah. And, as I look at this, the comments on this thread in the Facebook there, they said they were actually genuinely largely very helpful. And it was kind of working through all right, it's fine if you want to do something, but commit to, these are the projects. This is how much you think each project will take or how long it'll take. And this is the timeline in which you think you can have it done by. And if you can't have it done by XYZ time, at that point, you hire it out. Or, once you realistically look at the time burden and match that up to the time you have, then we can make a joint decision. Or you say, here's the one thing you're going to take ownership of, and here's the ones that you're going to outsource. We could solve that. We could solve this exact problem, but I think we're really presented the opportunity to imagine, what if we got our way with what we are actually making? What would that actually look like? And if we can kind of project out what success would look like there, would we change anything about what we get into? Imagine that you do end up in a situation where you can go to school for 12 or 16 years. With med school, it's 4 years of undergrad, it's 4 years of med school, it's 3 years of residency and 2 years of fellowship for one of these degrees. So, we're 10 to 12 years, something like that. And then you come out on the other end and you're making this income, but, you and your spouse or your partner are both working. So 670K of income, probably $500,000 of debt. The tax burden on 670K, if you throw that into a tax calculator, is $230,000 of taxes, assuming you're not saving anything in your pre-retirement accounts. And then you've got the student loans that you're paying next to that. And then you both have no time, which is what the express problem is. So you need to outsource everything, which the good news is you can do. You still have 400 some odd thousand left. But is there a point at which you wish that you had kind of changed a piece of that decision tree or changed what your goals are, how long you were stuck with, this reality as currently presented? Brad, that's the framework that I think would be valuable for us and for our audience just to go through, because, if you're in this situation now or you're contemplating going down this path, I think there's always room to optimize.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I would throw another little wrinkle into it in terms of valuing your time, even down to, and this almost seems arbitrary when you actually do it, but I think it's illuminating in terms of just coming up with an hourly fee, an hourly amount that you would judge your time is worth. And obviously it's going to depend on you, your situation, maybe potentially what you're earning, but come up with something. And if you can, and this is how I look at it. And now, Jonathan, it'll be interesting to hear your opinion in terms of outsourcing. I know it's hard sometimes. It's hard for us, especially who are more naturally frugal like me, to pay for things that I can do myself. And so I see some of myself in the husband in this scenario, though I wouldn't be fixing up a house and creating a house, let's be clear. But in terms of not hiring up, but when you think of, okay, I judge my time to be worth $100 an hour, let's just say hypothetically, or $50 an hour or $300 an hour. And you could hire someone to do something for $10 an hour or $15. Does that make some difference, right? Like, does it make, I talk about this with my wife, Laura, in terms of shopping. And one of the things that came out of COVID was us using these shopping delivery services. I mean, she was able to get back a lot of time per week in terms of just, I'm just going to run to the store for these two things. And you think of that as a fairly benign thing, but every time you quote unquote run to the store, even if it's quick, it's 15 minutes. And more likely it's more than that for most people. And you add up a bunch of those over a week, then you throw in the regular longer shopping stint. And I mean, you're talking hours per week. And if you could do that for a delivery fee and maybe whatever the other small fee is, would you pay that? And it's an open question. It's not a slam dunk. That's the beautiful thing about this calculus is it's very personal, just like every aspect of FI and personal finance. It's very personal. But Jonathan, without having some sense of, okay, I judge my time as worth this, and it's going to cost me X to have somebody else do it, whatever that have somebody else do it is. Without that, you have no starting point. So I think, like, to me, that's the starting point of this whole conversation.
I think it's a perfectly reasonable place to start and then, amend and add the nuance onto that. I think, what's going through the husband's mind is, yeah, it's going to cost me this to have him to do it, but they're not going to do it right. And so then it's going to cost me even more to have him do it right. So calculate that out. What is it going to cost to have him do it right? So if the first question is, what is your time worth? The second question that I think layers very neatly on top of that is, what do you love doing? How do you like to spend your time? Sounds like the husband loves to spend his time doing this stuff. This is what he really wants to be doing. Now, if that's not the case, that would really change where you go and how much you lean into this. But my thought is, there's so many different ways that you could tackle that. Why don't you write all of them down? Just hire it out. Okay, just do it all yourself slowly. Or if you're making $670,000 a year combined, then it sounds like, and we don't know their actual budget, but this is the exercise I would go through. Like, how much does your life actually cost? What's your savings rate? All these types of things. And then based on that, you could war game out. What if my husband, what if my partner, my spouse, what if they actually took a sabbatical? What if they stepped away from their job and their job was getting these things done because they love this and they value it as $100 an hour or whatever. And this is actually about what we are paying them in their salary. We'll just pay him to do this effectively. Right? That money would have been going outside the home anyways, but for the next 6 months, he's going to step away from a job that maybe he finds toxic. We don't know. We don't know what these details are. Why don't for the next 6 months to a year, they make their sabbatical being that person they always visualize to be, and they get to taste, because this is what you get to do when you're FI, whatever you want. why not embrace a piece of that for a season of life where, they get to be the hero of the story and at the same point, do it to the bar that they want, or fail miserably in the process and realize that it was a fantasy they never wanted to live out, but while getting something done. And then if that turns out to be the case, hey, we can always go back to contractors.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I love something you said in there that I think it kind of ties back to my example of the grocery delivery. And the punchline of my whole grocery delivery thing is Laura still goes shopping because with eyes wide open, she has decided that she actually enjoys it. So that's great. So this whole financial calculus didn't come into it. But one of the things that she said, and I've heard other people say, is, oh, they're not going to pick the right avocados, or, oh, I might get the small eggs. They're going to give me the worst avocados just to get them off the shelf. Right. Like they might pick a different, dozen eggs than I would have.
You should see my wife tapping the watermelons, dude. No one is tapping the watermelons. She's like, I got a knack for it. You got to look for the certain spots. You got to look for the seed lines. You got to make sure it sounds good on the inside. She would never trust a watermelon to someone on Instacart. Goodness.
That's really funny. But, and I get that. And there probably is some, let's even go the most generous way and say there's some validity to that you can do it better than the person from Instacart. I don't doubt that. But again, this is a mental framework. I think that's what we're trying to build here. So going to the husband saying, I'm going to have to come and clean up after them or fix it after them. Okay, well, that may be true, but can you quantify that? If they're going to screw up a $30,000 kitchen, well, that's a big deal. If you're talking about something minor, like they might install the fixture slightly wrong or something minor, well, okay, maybe you could fix that. Or in the case of this avocado, if we're talking about Laura can reclaim 3 hours of her life per week by having somebody else do the shopping for her, and that costs $30 or $40 in total fees, which I'm just making that up on the fly, but $30 or $40 in fees. And we might get one avocado we don't like and a small cauliflower instead of a larger one. Well, that's not that big of a deal. Would you trade 3 hours of your life for $30 and one bad avocado? Probably. I think you probably would, right? But at least when you start thinking about it like that, you're thinking about it rationally as opposed to just, oh, I can't do that because of X. And you spit off all of these emotional reasons that they might be true and they might be rational. And I'm not trying to say this is like purely an emotional thing. They may be rational, but they're quantifiably rational as opposed to just, I could never do that because X, Y, and Z. And I think that's just, again, a pretty cool framework to approach a decision with.
Right. When you're making a high income, but the income is tied to long hours on both sides, this poster is making the point, I'm working long hours. When I get home, I still have household chores. I have the house cleaning. I have laundry. I have finances. And all of this is true, whatever income level, that you're at. But it does speak to this point of the relationship between time and money. And what are we creating for ourselves long-term? What's the plan? Is the plan that we're always going to have a great income and whatever we make is going to go out the door? Is there a plan to unwind some of this and give us more options? That's what we want to build for ourselves all along the way. We want to build more options into our life. That's what kind of having some of the background that we talked about with understanding the role of your savings rate, understanding what your life actually costs, understanding what your plan is for your money, maybe, saving first, spend the rest, that sort of thing. That's what it is informing is what is this life that we want to build? And you're right, Brad. There is absolutely, like, if the numbers support it and you're happy with the plan that you're on, you understand where, your money goals are taking you. I don't fundamentally have a problem with like outsourcing various things to allow you to have more of your time back. You're making a great income, allow you to get more of your time back, even in the interim, as long as that is not trapping you in something that isn't lighting you up to begin with. Because we might be able to just get rid of something entirely, and then we don't need to make enough money to cover it, right? I need to make all this money to support the life that I'm trapped in. Well, what if we just walked away from that life, as currently constituted? We have made a couple adjustments, which in the scheme of things aren't that hard to change. And then now that gives us room to be way more flexible with our income arrangements. This is just the power of really thinking, what are all of our options? No matter how extreme it may seem, let's write it down so we're aware it is an option. And then we can say, how do we feel? What adjustments might we want to make to move in one direction or another? But it's still going to rely on that common framework that we've started with the episodes over the last 6 months. Although certainly you could look at our archives, the framework for financial independence. We've given a lot of the core of it it's going to be informed by how much does my life cost? How much is my savings rate? What is my plan to reach financial independence? And, what adjustments do I want to make based around what it is that we value? I think back to that list that Scott and Taylor made back in the day as a perfect example of this from the Playing with Fire documentary. Scott and Taylor had this conversation about their expensive life in San Diego, Brad.
Yeah, that was an amazing one. Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been 5 years since they came on the show and talked about that. But yeah, it was basically Scott was introduced to the concept of FI, and he was trying to present it to his wife, Taylor. And I think when you first hear about this, it sounds potentially scary, but he came up with this brilliant exercise of, hey, let's each write down the 10 things that we love doing the most, irrespective of money, just the 10 things that we love doing the most. And when they compared them, it was fascinating that virtually zero of them had anything to do with spending money whatsoever. And it had nothing to do with them living in the high cost of living area, San Diego, where they were living. So it was really, really interesting when they sat down as a couple and went over that and said, oh, this is fascinating. Like, we love spending time together. We love playing with our daughter. We love sitting around and chatting with each other and friends over a bottle of wine. And sure, that costs a couple dollars, but they weren't talking about buying hundreds of dollars of wine. It was the act of getting together with friends. And I think it's really, really cool when you can do an exercise like that and say, what am I actually looking to get out of this situation? What am I looking to get out of life? What lights me up, right? What are these things? And in most cases, from what I've seen, certainly in my own life, it's not about the spending money necessarily. It goes back to like maximizing, or like I said, what are you looking to get out of the situation? I've given this example so many times on the podcast, but it bears repeating. And my wife and I, every day at 5:00, we have a happy hour together. And we have a craft beer, or in my case, a cider that we get at the local Wegmans. And it's like $1 a beer, $1.50 a beer. And we could go out for drinks to a local brewery or a restaurant and spend $20, $30, $50 over dinner. But we've realized that's not what we're looking to get out of this. What we're looking to get is just 20 minutes together, right? We go out on our porch and the kids are inside and we're just talking like adults and we're spending time together. And that's what we would have been looking to get out of the situation of going to the brewery and spending, like I said, $20, $30, as opposed to we can sit in our porch. We don't have to drive anywhere. It's $3 for the beers and we get to spend the time together, which is what we're looking to get out of it.
It's as you were thinking about this, I was even thinking about that original question you asked, what is your time worth? And, I followed up with that question, well, what do you love? But I think a better question is like, depending on the activity, is it always the same dollar amount? Like, it's just like, if you give me a certain amount of dollars, I'll do anything you want. And that's just fundamentally untrue, especially the farther you are, on your journey. I was thinking, what would it cost at this point for someone to convince me to go pick back up my pharmacy license and go back behind the pharmacy counter and practice for a day? And I was like, could you convince me to come back in for $500 an hour? And I was like, no, probably not. There's no dollar amount you could get me to do some activities, which means that at some point your time is priceless. Your time is priceless. So that means there is a diminishing value of money. Think about that. The diminishing value of money is really, really critical. It's an important tool to give us the ability to choose the diminishing value, which means that, like, if you're on the path to become a quadra-billionaire, whatever, but money had no value to you past your FI number, think about the implications of that.
Wow. Yeah. That gets to something you said, a little phrase you said a couple minutes ago. I'm not sure exactly, but it's like, what's the plan? And I think that's so important. And most of us don't think about that, right? So I think about a kid I knew, I when we were in our early 20s, I say kid because I feel like I was a kid then, but a guy I knew, we were in the same soccer team, and he was working at an investment bank, and he was making a good boatload of money for 23-year-old kids, but he was working 90 hours a week. And to me, if you're just doing that endlessly, just to rack up points in the societal status game, that's a losing bet, because working 90-hour weeks over a long enough timeline, in my estimation, leads to a pretty terrible life. But if you're doing that with a plan, kind of maybe how somebody in the FI community would approach it, of, hey, I'm going to do this for 5 years, 3, 5, 7 years, something like that. And after that, so I will have sacrificed for those years. And those are precious years, which you will never get back. But if you're making a large enough income and you're saving a high enough percentage, you might reach FI, right? In that short bit of time. And this is kind of an egregious example, I guess, but I think it translates because so many of us, we don't have a plan. We don't have a larger plan. And I think that's what FI does. It gives us a framework of a plan for what am I doing? What am I doing with my time? What am I doing with the time that I spend earning income? And what does that look like? And how do I adapt it to the life that I want to live? And we've talked about ChooseFI, right? We just talked about that with Jessica from the Pioneers. And that's one very plausible option, which is you save a decent bit of money and then you just coast on in. You keep earning money, so you keep working, but you're letting that money compound in the background. Okay, that's fine. My example here of somebody earning a boatload of money and just doing it for a couple of years at the expense of their quality of life, that's rational also if you're doing it with a plan. To me, it's irrational if you're doing that endlessly to keep up with the person in the cubicle next to you who got a bigger bonus than you. That's irrational, but it's very rational to do that with a plan. So again, everybody has their own FI plan, but that's within the FI community, Jonathan, right? We're spoiled in a sense because most people are just kind of going through life doing what society tells them. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the FI community is we have a goal. We use this 4% rule of thumb, which, as we always say, it is not a hard and fast rule by any means, but at least it gives you a North Star of what is the amount I need to get to in my net worth to roughly approximate financial independence, as opposed to the horror stories you hear in the financial media of the Susie Ormans. You can never retire. You need $10, $15 million. And our brains shut off when we hear that because we know it's impractical, as opposed to financial independence says you control what you can control, which is what your life costs. And again, that back of the envelope rule of thumb is you take what your life costs per year and multiply by 25 and you get your FI number. And that, what's the plan? That degree of some certainty is a complete game changer.
Yeah. And recognizing that it's not binary, right, for individuals. So we just mentioned earlier in passing this idea for this husband and wife, maybe being the sabbatical. It's like a put up or shut up type moment, right? And I'm not saying this is the solution. And I'm sure they got great suggestions on that comment. I hope they sit down and have some real conversations about what each other's dreams and life goals are. Where could they see themselves in 6 months? What makes them happy? And just figure out from a great number of options. There's no wrong way, necessarily to do this if they're in agreement over it. But understanding that, Brad, to your point, what's the plan? Where are we going together? What's the plan on this? They had a plan. They had a vision when they bought the foreclosed house. Is the foreclosed house now a trap, or is it leading them somewhere that they're in agreement about? This rule of 25 really, or this 4% rule, taking your annual expenses, multiplying times 25, getting a sense, when I get to that point, when I can take my annual expenses, this year we spent $60,000. All right. And so, I multiply it times 25, and that's $1.5 million. If I had $1.5 million in invested assets, I could reliably predict that my income is replaceable. It's producing that for me for the rest of the time, kind of regardless of market conditions. Our portfolio is going to outlive us because we own great companies that are producing profits and they're distributing those profits back out to owners. We as the owners get enough to pay our expenses, right? It's not just some like magic nebulous thing. It's just in aggregate, you own enough ownership in the stake of the economy, and they're paying you as an owner out your share, which will average maybe around 7-8% on good years and bad years. But whatever, if you're just withdrawing 4% of that, that'll fit neatly into the ups and downs of the market, which can't be predicted. And your money should outlive you an inflation adjusted dollar. So just kind of a way of calibrating that statement. Now, it's not binary though, right? So the second layer of this is you're getting the benefits all along the way. So you had the epiphany, you've been taking action for a couple of years. It only takes a few years before you can make the next comment that I wanted to share from the Facebook group. And this is why I think it's so important to be connected to the community, whether you're in the Facebook group or you're part of Brad's newsletter where we're able to share this. This is the whole goal, to keep you locked in and make sure you know what your plan is. I'm not saying it's going to look exactly the same as Brad's or mine or this individual, but you have a plan that's based on similar fundamentals. It's a fundamentally solid plan. And so this individual made the statement, thanks to the podcast and the group, my big win of the year is I quit my job because I had the FU money lined up after I started listening to the podcast just last September, though. So that's September of 2021. I've been working for a company since last year, the pinnacle role of my career in a position of upper management leadership and my highest wage I've ever been offered, plus stock options. I became concerned with some of the things earlier this year that go against my ethics and my personal values, but I wanted to keep a level head and feel them out more to find out if they were rampant in the rest of leadership or simply a one-off situation. Fast forward to recently, and some really bad things happened in the company. Everyone internally knows about it. A number of people are leaving the company over this, including me. I stood my ground and in a professional but powerful way said I cannot internally or publicly represent this company in a way that it deserves. I am embarrassed and ashamed to have my name associated with this company and therefore cannot represent its interest and values. I also deserve to represent a company that aligns to my values, so let's peacefully part ways. I've spoken to a number of people in the company that want to leave, but have to stay until they have something new lined up because they do not have FU money. By not leaving now, this could affect future job prospects because their name will be associated with this company for longer than it should have been. My heart aches for them having been put in such an awful situation. This is a setback on my own path to FI, but it's okay. I can't wake up every day being proud of the work I'm doing, and this matters more to me than hitting 5 years. Now, as you can imagine from an anonymous poster, there are about 70 or 80 questions from people saying, what company?
What happened? What company?
But secondary to that, regardless of the actual company, we can appreciate that we have all been in a situation where if our finances had been in a different situation, we might have made a slightly different decision. And how powerful is it to recognize that as FU money? And we can call it Freedom Unlimited, family show here. Freedom Unlimited money. It's this pot of money that when you have it, it's not financial independence. This person does not never need to work again. At some point, they're going to have to lean back in. But what if, because you started getting your financial ducks in a row, you could go a year without money. You could go 2 years without money. We're not talking about an emergency fund where you lost, your tire got blown out and you got to come up with $1,000 to get the tire fixed, the car accident or whatever. This is, I could probably go a year or two without income. How much power and freedom does that give you? And Brad, I know this is something that you've had to deal with personally.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. Not only personally, but, and my example is kind of a weird one. It was more of like the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of leaving my job. But it actually is the exact example that I always use about the benefits of FI. And in my head, I've never had like the exact case study or real world scenario. It's always been theoretical. But then to read this is literally exactly what I've always said, which is having that flexibility, right? When you are beholden to your job, when you are living paycheck to paycheck, when your entire life would fall apart in 30, 60, 90 days without that paycheck, then you pretty much have to do everything they tell you to do, even if it goes against your values and your ethics. And that is what I've always said. But again, I never had that concrete example. And this is exactly it. And I like you, I want to know more. I'd love to know exactly what happened. But regardless of the case, this is the prototypical example of FU money. This person could have stayed there. They could have reached FI, but it was against what they stood for. And they couldn't live with themselves working at this job one day more. And their reputation, their own self-image, and the way they go through life is way more important than that money. And the beautiful thing is having that flexibility, having followed the path to FI, gave them this flexibility. And there is no more beautiful thing than that, Jonathan. I love this.
I would go so far as to say that as a result of this community leaning into taking action on various ideas, I would go so far to say no matter what industry you're in, you could transfer into a completely new field, making beyond medium income within 6 months. So a total reset within 6 months. That's how strongly I feel about it. So there's no reason for anyone, even if you're making $120,000 a year and you're feeling absolutely stuck, there is no reason for anyone to let themselves feel trapped. What I would do is go through the process that we talk about in this show, find out how much your life actually costs, what your survival expenses actually are, what your plan to financial independence is. If you love your job, great. If you don't love your job, if you hate your job, then fine. You don't want to just walk away without the financial security there. Start working towards FU money. And as soon as you feel like you have a version of that, then I would start aggressively looking into other career options. And that could just look like walking away and just picking back up in a completely new industry. There's no reason to tie yourself to one, getting to financial independence to make moves, to make your life better in the short term. And there's certainly no reason to stay in a job that doesn't represent you or your values. You're not doing each other any favors by just making it work. All right, my friends, let me follow up by encouraging you to get on the FI Weekly newsletter that Brad puts out every single week. I think it'll be an encouragement, a blessing to your life. I think he just does an absolutely wonderful job, and it keeps us as a community locked in together, even if you don't get a chance to listen to every episode. Being on the path of financial independence can sometimes feel like a lonely journey where you don't always have someone to, share your wins actually with. And this is a platform that we can use as a group to do that, to all get closer to financial independence together. And to get on that newsletter, you can just go to ChooseFI.com/subscribe. That's ChooseFI.com/subscribe. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.